I used to believe that love, once built on trust and years of shared memories, was unbreakable. My husband, Daniel, and I had been together for nearly a decade, and although our life wasn't perfect, it felt stable, comfortable, even. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and the kind of easy familiarity that made me feel safe. I often thought that was what marriage was supposed to be, not fireworks every day, but a steady flame that warmed the home. I didn't realize that sometimes a flame can dim without you noticing, until you're left in the cold. It started with small things, so small that I didn't take them seriously. Daniel came home later than usual, claiming meetings ran long or traffic was bad. He'd drop onto the sofa with a tired sigh and scroll through his phone instead of talking to me the way he used to. At first, I told myself he was stressed from work. After all, he'd been taking on extra projects and trying to impress his boss. I convinced myself that he was simply exhausted, that he needed space, that I didn't have to worry, but worry I did. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were constant, and it was the consistency that unsettled me. He used to tell me everything, funny things his colleagues said, small frustrations from his day, or something interesting he'd read online. Now, silence filled the spaces where his stories used to be. When I asked how work went, he'd answer with a flat "fine" and wander off to the shower. When I tried to share my own day, he'd nod absently, barely listening, his attention glued to the screen in his hands. The phone became a problem long before I admitted it. Daniel, who had always been relaxed about leaving his phone lying around, suddenly treated it like a secret diary. He'd keep it face down on the table, take it with him even to the bathroom, and jump slightly whenever a notification appeared. Once, when I reached over to check the time, he snatched it away so quickly that I froze. The look on his face wasn't anger, but fear. Fear of what I might see. My stomach tightened that day, and though I tried to brush the feeling aside, it clung to me like a shadow. Friends noticed before I confessed anything. One afternoon, while having coffee with my friend Mia, she gently asked, "You've been quiet lately. Everything all right at home?" I forced a smile and nodded, insisting Daniel was just under pressure. But I could tell she didn't believe me. I didn't believe myself either. The distance between us grew, not suddenly, but gradually, like a hairline crack running through glass until one day it splinters completely. Meals became quieter. Weekends, once spent going to markets or visiting friends, faded into separate activities. He'd go for a drive or catch up with the boys, though he never seemed eager to tell me much about where he'd been. I stopped asking too many questions. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife. I didn't want to give him a reason to think I didn't trust him, but trust was exactly what I was losing. One night, as we sat watching television, I realized that for the past half hour, Daniel hadn't looked at me once. Not even once. He laughed at something on his phone, smiled down at the screen with a softness I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I studied his face, the way his eyes lit up, the faint curve of his lips, and an awful, hollow feeling settled in my chest. That used to be my smile. My moments. My place. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, pretending I hadn't noticed. By this point, my intuition was no longer a whisper. It was a voice, clear, sharp, and persistent. Something was wrong. Deeply, undeniably wrong. Daniel wasn't just distant, he was disappearing from our marriage. Day by day, emotion by emotion, he was slipping away from me. Nights became the hardest. He'd roll to the far side of the bed, claiming he was too hot or too tired. The warmth between us, once so natural, felt forced whenever I reached for his hand. Sometimes he'd pull away without realizing, turning in his sleep toward the direction of his phone. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his soft breathing, and wonder when exactly the man I loved stopped being mine, yet I still tried to convince myself it was temporary. A rough patch, nothing more. Couples go through ups and downs, right? That's what everyone says. Marriage isn't always smooth sailing. Perhaps I wasn't giving him enough attention. Perhaps I'd become boring. Perhaps life had become too routine. I blamed myself because blaming myself felt easier than facing the truth that my marriage might be collapsing. But deep inside, a quiet dread began to grow, one I could no longer ignore. It followed me into the kitchen in the mornings, lingered beside me at work, and crawled beneath my skin at night. Something was happening behind the scenes. Something I wasn't being told, and though I didn't yet know what it was, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my heart. The cracks were no longer beneath the surface, they were everywhere around me.
The next morning arrived with an unusual heaviness, as though the day itself carried knowledge I did not yet possess. I met Malik Adeyemi just after sunrise, the city still stretching awake, its usual urgency replaced by a rare, fragile quiet. He greeted me with his customary calm, offering no elaboration, only a subtle nod that suggested we were already late for something unspoken, but we traveled in near silence, leaving behind the familiar geometry of streets and buildings. The air gradually changed, shedding the dense, metallic scent of the city for something earthier, less defined. I noticed the way Malik drove, steady, unhurried, as though speed held no advantage over inevitability. Questions gathered in my mind, yet his composure discouraged interruption. Eventually, paved roads surrendered to narrower paths, and the landscape unfolded into a quieter world. The noise of traffic dissolved, replaced by the subdued language of wind and distant movement. Malik parked near a modest clearing, turning off the engine with deliberate finality. "Come," he said simply. I followed him along a worn trail, my unease growing with each step. The environment felt stripped of distraction, exposing thoughts I had been carefully avoiding. Ahead, partially obscured by trees and filtered light, stood a small hut. Its structure was humble, almost fragile, yet it possessed a quiet dignity that resisted dismissal. Malik paused before it, his expression unreadable. "This is where I come when I need honesty," he said. The statement lingered oddly in the air. I studied the hut, uncertain how a place so simple could bear such significance. Malik stepped inside without hesitation, leaving me to confront a brief moment of reluctance before following. The interior was sparse, defined by necessity rather than decoration. Soft daylight entered through narrow openings, illuminating the space with muted gentleness. There was nothing imposing, nothing designed to impress. The absence of excess created a strange, disarming clarity. Malik seated himself and gestured for me to do the same. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence here felt different from the city's quiet, heavier and more attentive, as though the air itself listened. "You've been afraid of your own thoughts," Malik said at last. His words were neither accusation nor comfort, merely observation. I exhaled slowly, feeling the truth of it settle uncomfortably. "I don't want to imagine things that might not be real," I replied. Malik's gaze remained steady. "And yet you already have." The statement unsettled me. "What is this about, Malik?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, but carrying an unfamiliar gravity. "Claire Donovan." My chest tightened at the sound of her name in this place, stripped of context and routine. "What about her?" Malik hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from care, as though measuring the weight of what he was about to say. "There are truths that arrive gently," he said, "and truths that resist gentleness. This one belongs to the second kind." A subtle tension crept into the space, pressing against my patience. "Just say it." Malik studied my face, perhaps assessing my readiness, perhaps acknowledging that readiness was irrelevant. "Claire's been seeing someone else." The words landed with a disorienting stillness. There was no dramatic surge of emotion, no immediate eruption of disbelief. Instead, a strange numbness spread through me, as though my mind refused to process what it had clearly heard. "That's not possible," I said automatically, though the certainty in my voice sounded borrowed. Malik did not argue. "I would not bring you here for suspicion, Ethan Cole, only for certainty." The numbness fractured, replaced by a chaotic flood of thoughts. Images, memories, small, unexplained moments rushed forward, rearranging themselves with cruel coherence. Claire's distant smiles, her guarded phone, the widening silence between us. Each detail now carried a different, harsher meaning. "How do you know?" I asked, my voice thinner than intended. That Malik's expression remained composed, yet tinged with something that resembled regret. "Because I have seen them together." The hut seemed to contract around me. "You're mistaken. I am not." The firmness of his reply left no space for denial. I searched his face for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this might be a misunderstanding. I found none. Why didn't you tell me before? The question emerged edged with confusion rather than anger. Malik's eyes held mine without defensiveness. Because timing matters. Truth delivered too early becomes noise. Truth delivered too late becomes cruelty. The logic of his answer felt intolerable, yet part of me understood. I lowered my gaze, struggling to reconcile the Claire I loved with the reality Malik described. Who is he? I asked. Malik shook his head slightly. The identity changes nothing essential. It changes everything to me. What truly changes everything, Malik said quietly, is not who he is, but what Claire has already become to you. His words pierced through the turbulence, forcing an uncomfortable recognition. My pain, I realized, was rooted not only in betrayal, but in the collapse of a narrative I had desperately preserved. I had sensed the distance, felt the shift, yet clung to the illusion of stability because it was easier than confrontation. She could have told me, I murmured. Yes. She could have ended things honestly. Yes. The simplicity of Malik's responses stripped away any remaining refuge. The betrayal was no longer hypothetical, no longer a shapeless fear. It was real, defined, irreversible. An unexpected wave of grief rose within me, heavy and disorienting. Not merely for Claire Donovan, but for the version of my life that now revealed itself as fiction. The hut's quietness intensified every sensation, offering no distraction from the magnitude of the moment. What do I do now? I asked, though the question felt almost childish. Malik regarded me with steady calm. You breathe. You endure the collapse. And then you decide what deserves to survive it. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the brutal clarity of his words. Outside, the world continued with indifferent serenity, untouched by the implosion occurring within me. The contrast felt almost unbearable. When I finally opened my eyes, the space seemed both unchanged and entirely different. The truth now existed between us, immovable and undeniable. I sensed that nothing in my life could return to its previous shape, that every future choice would carry the imprint of this revelation. Malik rose slowly, moving toward the doorway. Stay as long as you need, he said. I watched him step outside, his figure briefly silhouetted against the soft daylight before disappearing from view. Alone in the hut, surrounded by silence and the rawness of understanding, I felt the full weight of what had been lost and the uncertain, terrifying freedom of what remained unresolved.